Hello, everybody. It's Stefan Molyneux for Freedom Made Radio. I am thrilled and delighted to have Janet Heimlich on the show. For those who don't know, it was your grandfather who actually invented the Heimlich maneuver.
No, my father.
You've written a very powerful and grim. I mean, there's no other way to put it. It is hard reading. I think it is important reading. The book, of course, is Breaking Their Will. No, so let's. I just want to quote a few statistics from the book, which I think are always worth reviewing. And of course, you give good reasons for focusing on the U.S. In your book. But of course, more than 80% of Americans belong to one religion or another. More than half of Americans say religion is very important in their lives. And more than a quarter of Americans say they attend church at least once a week. 86% of Americans believe in God, a universal spirit, a higher power, and so on. More than 80% believe in heaven. Nearly 70% believe in hell, and 70% believe in the devil. And they're more likely to believe in the devil, hell, and angels than in Darwin's theory of evolution. And a higher percentage of Americans firmly reject the concept of evolution than do those living in any of the 32 European countries and Japan. More than 3/4 of Americans believe God sometimes intervenes to cure people who have a serious illness. More than 40% of Americans believe Jesus will return to Earth within the next 40 years. That's very specific. And more than 1/3 of Americans believe the Bible is the Word of God. And the progress in pushing back some of this religiosity, at least from the agnostic or atheist perspective, has been somewhat lacking. And so, although the Bible doesn't have a lot in it pertaining to parent-child relationships, how to raise children, I think it would be crazy to say that the most influential book in the world, really, if you count the Old Testament, and certainly in the West, if the Old and the New Testament, does not have an effect on how parents interact with their children. You talked, I think, I'm thinking about the story of Billy Graham's, but his mother was proud to overcome her own instincts and to not intervene when Billy Graham's dad was beating the living crap out of him as a boy, by basically saying, well, the father is the head of the household. He is inspired by God. It is my duty to obey the husband as he obeys God, and so on. And her natural instincts to intervene when her child is being beaten were really, and she pridefully, I got the sense of in the passage you quoted, squelched by this sense of religious duty and obligation. And in the same way, when you talk about the very powerful chapter that you have on female and male circumcision, the woman who says to the doctor, if I'd had a gun when you were cutting the tip of my boy's penis off, I think I would have shot you. She says, I would have shot you, not even I think. The power of ideology to overcome what I think most biologists would say are pretty primal human instincts to take care of your young, to protect them from harm and so on, is incredibly powerful, and I think gives lie to the fact where people say, well, these doctrines have no influence on parenting.
Right, especially if the person is raised with those doctrines from birth. And again, I think it goes back to this idea that a child, and then later an adult, will receive love, whether it's God's love, a parent's love, or religious leaders' love, that all of that will be theirs if they follow these rules and if they are completely obedient. So, Mrs. Graham was proud of herself because she was doing what she had been taught was the right thing to do. And as a result of her obeying that, there was some reward there in terms of people respecting her or appreciating her. I can't talk about her on a very individual level. I didn't know the woman, and I just read her autobiography. But that one particular passage did, I think, really point out how subtle these kinds of influences are, where there's actually a reward for not recognizing a child's need for protection, for safety, for the need to develop one's mind and that kind of thing. And I think if the parent is brought up with that from birth, then you're just going to see this cycle continuing.
Yeah, just by the by, I mean, reading one of a hugely influential book in my life was Paul Johnson's Intellectuals. I don't know if you've ever read it, but it's a sort of a history of the childhood and adulthood and moral choices of some very prominent intellectuals in the 20th century, and reading the history of the childhood histories of U.S. presidents and so on. I mean, the amount of unprocessed pathology in public figures makes you wonder if the entirety of society might just be incredibly traumatized and not notice it.